Okay, you've made it halfway through the course now, and we are going to move into the chapters on Access. Access can be a little intimidating, especially if you've never worked with a database program directly before. Don't worry though, we're going to go pretty slow through it. We're just going to learn some of these basic concepts. Here we are in lesson or skill 1.1 for Access. Just an introduction. Access is different than all the other programs we've been working with. You do have an Access database file that you will have saved to your computer or your hard drive, but within that file you'll have different objects that you work with, and you're actually going to be saving those objects inside the open database. You can see I have a database opened here, and on the left here, this is my navigation pane. You can see I have tables and queries and forms, and this one doesn't have them, but you might also have reports in there. And you'll work with those objects individually, and you'll save them inside the opened Access database. So you don't really save the same way you do with Word or Excel or even PowerPoint. So just be aware of that. You're basically working sort of in your own environment inside the Access database. Now, Access is a relational database program, which means that you have different tables that relate to each other. That's the relationship part of it, or relational part of it. And what that means basically is you have a table of information, but you don't include all of the possible information in one table. You have different tables to kind of break it out. The example that I have here is we are looking at a library catalog database. In that we have a books table, we have a patrons table, and we have a transactions table. I wouldn't keep in one table a list of every book that we have along with each person that's checked it out. That would just get redundant. One book that's really popular may be checked out 100 times, and I'd have 100 records in the table containing all of the book information that you see here. You can see there's a lot of information for one book, so I'd have this duplicated 100 different times. Same thing goes for patrons. I only have the specific information for the patron there in the patrons table, and then what I do is I have a third table here called transactions, and in the transactions table, that's where I put an ID for a book. I can select a book, and I also have an ID for who checked it out. So you go back to the books table and you can see there's an ID. So ID 5. Go to the patrons table, there's an ID 2 and 3. So when I have this book, there's not a whole lot of data in this table or database yet. This book called Stormbreaker, when it gets checked out by Andrew Johnson, that goes in the transactions table, and it says Andrew Johnson's ID goes here and the book goes here. So now instead of having a big row with a bunch of data in it, we're looking at just really two fields and then some more data, when it was checked out, when it was due, stuff that's specific to the transaction. So that's the thing about relational databases, is you want to keep your tables limited to just the data that is specific to that table type. So books doesn't contain anything about patrons, doesn't contain anything about transactions even, or any other table we might have in there, maybe buildings even. You can have a separate table that links books to different buildings if you have a group of libraries, a consortium of sorts in this database. So that's the key thing to remember about relational databases. We'll get into that a lot more as we go along. So that's it. Your code word for this lesson is going to be blue, the color blue.